Welcome to the Make Every Media podcast, or MIM TV if you're watching on YouTube. I'm Michael Furstenfeld, wishing you a very happy Back to the Future day, the 21st of October. It was on this day in 2015 that Marty McFly arrived in the future, fresh from 1985. And there were hoverboards and flying cars and video conferences and fax machines. And it is on this same day in 2022 that our Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Twitch subscribers are getting access to this very special pilot episode early. Now, fast forward a couple of weeks to November 5th of 2022 when the rest of the world gets access to this pilot, and then rewind to 1955, the day that Marty McFly first arrived in the past and began to rewrite his own history. Today on Make Every Media, we're also doing some time travel back to June 22nd of 2021, last summer, when we recorded a test run of a show that came straight out of the head of Peter Rogers like a flux capacitor while you're standing on the john to hang a clock. It's a show called Steal Every Media. And, well, I'll just let him explain that in more detail in a moment here. We recorded this conversation live on Twitch as a part of our Time Soup broadcast last summer. Peter Rogers is also the host, and Kevin Miller is his very special first guest. And then there's this whole second part of the show where the amazing clown Julie Moore comes in and talks about Commedia dell'arte, and then I'm brought in to help map the timelines of all three Back to the Future movies. It's ridiculous. It's too much, and we're still editing it down, and it will be available first to subscribers only. So if you like what you hear here and want to support this show and also get early access to Steal Every Media Part 2 later this year, you can do that by supporting us on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee or subscribing to our Twitch channel, which you can actually do for free if you have an Amazon Prime account. Find links for all of that at linktree.com/makeeverymedia. In the meantime, please enjoy part 1 of our 2022 pilot podcast hatchery program presentation, Steal Every Media, with Peter Rogers.
Howdy, everybody, and welcome to our first episode, our first test run of the podcast Steal Every Media, presented on behalf of Make Every Media. My name is Peter Rogers. I've been improvising here in Austin a little over 20 years, and I've also been writing and thinking a lot about how to come up with shows, what improv can do next, and especially how improv can connect to other art forms. To that end, we've got this show here, Steal Every Media. The idea is that a guest comes on with a beloved piece of art, a beloved piece of media, and we have a talk about what improv can steal from that piece of media, what techniques it can use, what ideas it can take, what it can run with to discover what new things improv can do. And that takes us to our guest today, who is Kevin Miller. He's also improvised in Austin for about 20 years. He was dean of the Merlin Works School for a while here. He's appeared on The Mortified Guide over on Netflix and hosted Pints and PowerPoints. Kevin, what piece of media have you brought to discuss today?
Hello, I have brought a true masterpiece for us to pick apart and try to find any flaw with. And that is Back to the Future.
Back to the Future.
1985, Robert Zemeckis.
Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis' baby for like 5 years going into that, right?
The two Bobs, yeah. And it's remarkable. Like, we could ramble on about the backstory of the movie and how it... I just read recently that Doc Brown was a character in a different script, and then they had a plan to they had this story about a kid going back in time and meeting his parents, and they said, let's just use this wacky scientist character as the inventor.
Ideas for it. 80s cinema is fascinating to me because I would have been 10 in 1985 when this came out. I would have been a perfect age to watch it and have it blow my tiny little mind.
Yeah.
But I barely watched movies at all in my childhood. So there's this whole world of cinema that I respect and love, but I don't have the same connection to as everybody else who got to.
Yeah, and it's a shame. My girlfriend is Dutch Australian and has not seen a lot of the classics, and my attempts to show her the classics have largely not gone well, because many of these movies that you should normally have the sentimentality for have not aged. It's just some of them are painful. But and Back to the Future, I was kidding about it, trying to find flaws. There are certainly a few things that have not aged well.
Oh yeah,
there too. But it's still just such a well-made Swiss watch of a movie that I am a bit hesitant to talk about how we use it for improv, because it's just so deliberately created, and there's no fat on this movie. Just every line and every frame contributes directly to the story that they're telling, and the improv is you want it to look like that. Yeah, it's not that. You try to make it look like that and usually fail.
There are a couple of points in that I want to follow up, but before we dive into those, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your own history with the movie. Do you remember when you first saw Back to the Future?
Not exactly.
Did it sort of fade into view the way that...
Yeah, faded into view is a good way to put it. We had a VHS copy. My mom didn't approve of the language in the movie, but let me watch it begrudgingly. Yeah, I was excited about it from I was 8 when it came out, and so yeah, that was much like you, prime age for me to get into the cool looking sports car that turns into a spaceship at the end of some movie. And maybe we'll touch a bit on Back to the Future too, because I was, I think, 11, like even more primed and ready for them to, yeah.
And you appeared on a podcast specifically devoted to Back to the Future, right?
Yes. Those listening to this podcast can search for Back to the Future Minute, which is part of the quirky subgenre of podcast that's called Movies by Minutes. And every single episode is breaking down the next sequential minute of the movie. So I was on 1 minute of Back to the Future Part 2 and another Part 3, but the entire trilogy's worth of podcasts is hard to imagine them going into more detail.
I love your point about like how much of this feels like one of those rock tumbling devices where you just take something rough, put it in there, turn it over for, a long time, and it comes out perfectly smooth. Like they edged off every possible error.
Yeah, except imagine that like Hollywood is a rock tumbler that destroys rocks, because just at any given moment, there are brilliant scripts that are being just torn to tiny little shreds. The Russell Crowe Robin Hood movie, nobody remembers now.
Oh my God!
But
yes.
You know about this?
I know the story, but please.
The original script went around Hollywood for 10, maybe 20 years, and it was just this famously amazing script.
Originally called Nottingham, right?
Yeah, because it had the Sheriff of Nottingham as the protagonist.
As the protagonist, which is a brilliant, simple idea. And just like, take my money.
And it was supposed to be really well done, and by the time the Hollywood rock tumbler machine got done with it, it turned into a dark and gritty Robin Hood, which wasn't even bad. It was just so mediocre that half the people listening are like, wait, there was a Russell Crowe Robin Hood movie?
Yep.
And so, yeah, to my point, Hollywood does that to good ideas. And in this case, Hollywood took these like weird pieces of, oh, wouldn't it be cool to meet your parents at your age? Oh, what about this wacky character? And then out came this just perfectly polished rock.
And back to Gems, that was because Gale and Zemeckis had just made Romancing the Stone.
Oh,
and
right.
That was a huge success. And it's like, okay, you can do what you want now. Like, oh, we've got the script.
We've got the script. Got it. And there's the whole Eric Stoltz being replaced by Michael J. Fox. Just so many things should have gone wrong.
To shoot it at the same time as Family Ties.
Ties, that was it.
He would finish his day of shooting on the sitcom, and they would load him into like a van with a bed and ship him over to the sound
and some cocaine.
One would hope.
Part of the thing that makes this movie so damn good, a huge part, is just the chemistry between Marty and Doc. So Eric Stoltz is a fine actor, but if that doesn't work, then you have this pedophilic seeming like relationship between an old man and a high school student. Like the fact that they can make that seem like a loving, natural relationship with not an ounce of creepiness to it, it's miraculous.
Absolutely. Yeah, they do a lot of hard work that you don't see on the surface, making weird ideas feel straightforward. I did a watch on this going into this and was just like really hit by how many things you cannot use at all. Like how much of the storytelling is the phrase is pure cinema, how they don't use dialogue or action to get an idea across. It's just how they arrange the shots one after another. Oh, you see a piece of news footage, you can't really hear it, but you see it and it says plutonium stolen. You see Marty walk through the like entry foyer of the lab, you see the skateboard roll and hit a box marked plutonium.
I got to run this experiment just when I was watching this before we recorded. My girlfriend was there, and I said, just say out loud everything you're learning from this opening shot. And my screenwriting professor in college called it the best shot in Hollywood history. And sure enough, just every element of the movie is laid out in this supernatural way. Just one flowing take of the camera. I don't know. It's perfect. I have no bones to pick with it.
Yeah, and that would be such a nightmare of an improv of like an opening 1 or 2 minutes where you introduce 20 different elements that all have to be picked up.
You ever try a like murder mystery in improv? It's just like everyone tries to throw out clues and suspicious behaviors, and it all gets dropped.
Oh yeah. The best way I've seen that work is to create hidden information for the cast, where the cast knows who's getting killed and who did the killing. The audience doesn't, and you build around that.
And then you build around that. Exactly. Yeah, that's freaking great. And everything short of that is like an improv story needs to be about one thing, and I don't mean that literally. You can have your A and B plot if you're doing a long form thing, but you need to define really clearly up front. And the way that Back to the Future connects to that is it's got a really simple log line. A kid goes back in time, meets his teenage parents, and awesome. If you gave that to I bet if you got a class full of young improvisers today, half of them wouldn't have seen Back to the Future, so you could say here, improvise
it. Some old movie you haven't heard of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can, as long as you have just a piece of the just the kernel of the story that you're going to tell, then it's fine. But you can't just start laying out random bits and hope that it's going to stitch together. It's going to do the rock tumbler thing, but bad.
Oh god, and that takes me to a couple of points I find really cool about Back to the Future in particular. The first one is that I wish I could credit this properly, but there was a tweet that described 80s genre movies as being like the first 8 minutes of a traditional drama, and at the end, the last 8 minutes of a traditional drama, and in between is where all the genre stuff happens.
Wow.
So an example they cited was Die Hard in its initial minutes is about a New York cop whose marriage is falling apart because he can't handle his wife's success on some level.
Yeah.
And then the end is them back together, having resolved the issues that were frustrating between them.
Wow.
And here in Back to the Future, you've got like an opening sequence that's what Marty is trying to set up the big date while dealing with just seething interfamily problems. Like nobody seems to really like each other. Nobody's happy. And you could definitely see a drama coming out of it. And then by the end, in addition to everything else, but the core of it is that the family is healthy and affectionate and
like in a better place.
In a better place. Yeah.
I was on this most recent watch. I was like, oh, they aren't quite as dysfunctional as I thought. Like they're having dinner as a family. The older brother and the dad are like laughing together at the thing, and that's useful in the movie because it's not wildly implausible for everyone to be getting along at the end. Everyone is just everyone's just ticked up a notch. It's not a good situation. His mother is an alcoholic who's not quite sure why she married her husband. It was a tiny bit nicer than I remembered it being.
Yeah, and I would add to that, like they don't go so far that you just hate them all. Like they keep you in a place where you're like your heart kind of goes out to them, and that puts you in the slot for the rest of the movie. And that's I think absolutely something that, because we do so many genre shows in improv, and I don't know if anybody really thinks about I've seen shows do this to greater or lesser extents, but the notion of we're just gonna do a drama that happens to have a genre thing show up for most of its runtime and feeling that structure.
Back to the Future is very much that. So whenever I would teach narrative improv, or whenever I would teach genre specifically, I would draw a circle on the whiteboard and I would write in heist movie. And I would say, all right, fill the sim. What do we got? A big safe. Got it. The wild card, shootouts, just all the, explaining the plan. Everything you can think of for a heist movie. And this is what at Merlin Works anyway, maybe everywhere, is called the circle of expectations. And then I would say you're allowed one thing outside of the circle of expectations. So you can have a heist movie and then there can be a dinosaur, and that's fine. All right, we've got a dinosaur as part of the crew. Let's play with that twist on it. But you cannot have a dinosaur and aliens land, because then you're on the train to Crazy Town. And in Back to the Future is not a time travel movie with something else as the twist. It's a family movie, or as you say, like it has dramatic underpinnings, and time travel is the twist. Time travel is the unexpected thing that straightens his life out.
That kind of matches how they came up with the movie, as I understand it, around 1980 when they were doing used cars. As I read in the Wikipedia, it was, I think, Bob Gale visiting his parents and thinking, wow, how did these people ever become friends? Kind of, not in a harsh way, but like he just couldn't imagine them as teenagers meeting. And I don't even think time travel was necessarily part of the plot at that point. Like there are other means of magic whereby you see young versions of your parents.
Right. And it could have been just like, he just wakes up and it's never explained, And,
yeah.
And my actual favorite movie is Groundhog Day, and maybe the greatest strength in that movie is that they don't explain it. So it's not an automatic. Back to the Future would have been bad if they didn't have a time traveling DeLorean element to it. But good thing it worked out.
To me, and this may be way off, but as I think back on all time travel movies as a whole, it feels like after the Back to the Future, most of the time travel movies I think of have the sort of Back to the Future 2 feel, the sort of Christopher Nolan feel, especially of the time travel is doing a lot of interesting plot mechanics. Like, okay, this is going to show you how this fits in with this, and this other thing is actually this person from the past.
Right.
They were looking away from the camera or something like that. And that becomes spectacularly hard to do in improv, of coming up with the one time travel thing that explains the 20 weird things you have done before. I was on a Doctor Who improv show. I had that job a lot of the time, and it is exceptionally challenging and not something you want to count on.
No, don't do that to yourself. Like, why would you hobble yourself in that way? The progression of linear time is a gift when it comes to telling an improv story.
But yeah, Back to the Future 2 is very much more like loops and loops and going around other stories that have already happened. And especially all the time travel stories I think of since then have that really strong element of we're solving the puzzle box. And honestly, I wonder if that makes improvisers kind of shy away from time travel as a genre thing, just because in modern times it's so, again, puzzle boxy and not so much thematic the way it hits in Back to the Future.
For reasons already stated, I hope it makes them shy away from it.
If they're going to try and do that version of it.
Or if you're going to come up with a time travel format, then it needs to be a time travel format, and it needs to have some kind of structure to prevent just rails on the thing to guide you along. And past a certain point, it's like, why is this improv in the first place? So it's nice to and I've seen just truly madcap things. One of my all-time favorite just one-off, maybe not one-off, improv formats I saw was Improv for Evil doing Time Hobo. Did you see this?
I've heard the legends. I didn't see the show. I know it was a running joke in that improv troupe for like a decade, and then they finally did.
The premise is there's a time machine, and all of this is explained at the beginning. There's a time machine, and it's tuned only for one person. It can only work for the person that's in it the first time it's used. And then on the night that it's left alone, a homeless person played by Jason Bynes gets in there and takes a nap and is zapped back in time. And now only this hobo can put time travel problems right again. So, the fun of the genre there is just the wildly unqualified person trying to do this this expert work, and it's fantastic and good example of like the rails are the format, the stuff that's explained before the improv even starts, and now you have a nice type format. And that works because you're just jumping around from one thing to another. You're not looping back on yourself. You're not puzzle boxing anything. And everyone can just enjoy the Bill and Ted silliness of it,
Yeah, and that's something that's a really good point, is that there are so many classically improv style games you can play with the notion of time travel. And that you see some of that in Back to the Future, how good of a game they make out of Marty McFly consistently screwing up his references and everyone around him assuming he's a sailor, right?
Yes, with the life preserver. And those vests have come back into style since 1985. So we talk about a full circle thing. Side note, I always said that the only Back to the Future remake I would ever accept would be made in 2015 and go back in time to 1985.
To the making of Back to the Future.
Yeah. So now that window is closed, then there should be no. And I won't spoil it here, but anyone listening can go to havetheyremade-back-to-the-future-yet.com and see the results.
Oh god! But yeah, that was like another sort of watershed, in that it was early enough in these blockbuster franchises that Galen Zemeckis got veto privileges over anything in perpetuity. And
the proverbial blank check.
Yep.
To use podcast lingo.
So that reminds me that like time travel, you can use it for games, for really solid, fun improv games. And then there's also the notion of using it for something thematic and kind of relationshipy. And so Back to the Future gets both, and both are available to improv, I think. Especially what you said about remaking it in 2015. There's something so unique about the 1955, 1985 difference, just because there was such an invention of the 1950s that was still kind of holding on at that point. That, if we look back to, like right now, it would be a flashback to like 1991, 1992, where we there's a lot of footage of everyday people in 91, 92. If a parent who was a teenager then, who was my age essentially, came up with all sorts of stories about what life was like then, like a few minutes on the internet would give the lie to all of it.
It was a genre there for a while. Happy Days was this, Grease was this, just this 30 years ago things were better. And like, it's more problematic the more you think about it, and it's become more problematic as time goes by, because it's almost literally the Making America Great Again narrative. The notion that the 50s were a nice idyllic time. And Back to the Future really plays it up. There's all this graffiti on the school in the 80s, but not in the 50s.
Not in the 50s.
And Marty, who has a rather dumb line where he says, "Man, they really cleaned this place up. Looks brand new." And, but yeah, that's we don't need to go off on a woke rant about it, but yeah, it's problematic in the existence of the genre. But even within that genre, there are tropes that you can use, and good God, tropes are your friends if you are trying to do. Because back to the heist thing, if I get a group of improvisers I've never met before and say, I want to see a heist movie, then their brains immediately start firing off with all these references, and so does the audiences, and it's great. Everyone in the room is on the same page. And so if someone says, "All right, I've got a job for you," then we know it's going to be the biggest job of his career. We know that, or her or their, we know that the thief is going to demand to retire. This is the last one. We know something's going to go wrong in the middle of it. Just like the checkboxes are going to be checked. And that's not only fine, that's fantastic, because sometimes we watch movies just to watch the wheels spin in just such a way. And that's the reason there have been 40 James Bond movies, because we like we like seeing what variety they can come up with as they are checking off those boxes. So please check off the boxes and trust the silliness of improv to provide the elements of chaos, in the middle of that.
And I'd add to that, like, we also watch these movies because we know we don't have to spend the first 15 minutes with like ham-handed exposition saying, this is a heist. This is what a heist is. This is how heists work. You don't have to build the infrastructure for a genre. You can just go with the story and everyone's on the same page.
Yes, and it can be something like you and I worked on Fiasco together, which is a genre that audience members aren't going to get. It's a somewhat popular board game, and no offense, it's a fantastic board game. But it's just nothing that the average audience member has in their head. But you can get your troupe, your cast together and crew, and say, all right, this is our playground. This is our sandbox. And these are the toys that we have in the sandbox, and how we can, all the different ways we can put them together. And you rehearse, the way you rehearse any improv, and get used to those tropes and get used to putting them together. And then you put it in front of an audience who's never heard of Fiasco, who might never have seen a Coen Brothers movie, but they connect with it because it looks polished. It looks like it just came out of a rock tumbling machine, pristine. And it's really just people. It's really just people checking those mental boxes. Like, oh, I see. We are here, and therefore that.
And it's a side thing of like, if you're doing an improv show that doesn't have like a heist, that doesn't have a standard genre that goes along with it, that sets audience expectations.
Right.
If you don't have that, then it's even more incumbent on you to set expectations with every single tool you have. Like the font on the flyer or on the program should give them some indication of what genre they're in for. So like for Fiasco in that case, we were working off of Coen Brothers movies via a board tabletop role-playing game. That's not a genre that we can count on the audience knowing. So everything, we're using like the classic Hitchcock Saul Bass font. We are using his sort of artwork. We're playing the sort of jazz you would associate with an old heist movie or an old crime caper. Everything to get them in the pocket of sort of inventing the genre for them as they're walking in the door and sitting down to watch your show.
Exactly. And you and I know damn well through Fiasco, but also through many hideout main stage shows that we've seen and been a part of, the extent to which the tech, the crew can help make this happen. Just the lights and sound and music choices can psychologically affect the audience to get them in the mood that they need to get at. And so you could go up and not even speak English and understand, what mood is being projected at you, and you can get involved in that way.
Absolutely. I wanted to tug on the thread of comparing 1955 and 1985, not on the problematic aspects of it, but rather like this notion of if you kind of how good 80s cinema is at or 80s genre cinema is at presenting things that feel kind of out of time and apolitical. And as soon as you kind of scrape off the surface of them a little bit, you see it engaging in something that's really of the time and a social issue at the time. So like Back to the Future, innocent story about traveling in time and meeting your parents. But like you look at it closely, it's like, our parents have been lying to us about the 1950s. Let's dig into that.
Right. Yeah, it almost should have gone the other way. Not should have. It's great the way it is, but you can imagine the alternative when they are speaking rose. Man, let's just workshop a remake right now of Back to the Future where the parents are going on about how amazing it was 30 years ago, how that's when America was great. And then the protagonist goes back in time and sees, oh, that's how it is. And the movie dips its toe into that in terms of like the dad being a peeping Tom and the mom, being a big drinker as a teenager.
And what is his name? Goldie Brown?
Goldie Wilson.
Goldie Wilson, who is stuck sweeping the floors at the diner and doesn't have a chance to do his destiny as mayor of the town.
As the mayor. Oh yeah, that's one of the things that has not aged well, is the fact that like Marty gives the black floor sweeper the idea to run for mayor, which he successfully does, and then later he inspires Chuck Berry to make
invent rock and roll.
Yeah, exactly. That might get a pass because it's technically an endless time loop. He's just hearing music.
We could say Chuck Berry invented his own music. It just
right,
depends
exactly.
where you put the start and end of the loop.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, it's interesting to imagine the alternative. But I mean, part of the reason the movie works is because it does a bit of both. It has fun with like, all right, things were nicer on the surface back in the 50s, but it hints at
it's not quite the world that our parents told us it was.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm over here thinking I need to find out. Like, I can't imagine my parents ever being in love, and they're great, and they're just this is nothing against either one of them, but they're such different people, and I need to talk to them sometime about like, take me back. No, I'm curious like what this is like, and I know, as any adult knows, how people change over time, so it would just be interesting to hear the story of how it evolved.
So like Bob Gale had that conversation, and I think also was getting inconsistent information from his parents at different times when they told him a
little Rashomon thing happening.
But I was thinking like Star Wars seems completely apolitical if you don't realize it was made right after like Watergate and all of those things. Just so many things where we feel like to do genre work or to do sci-fi, we are going to abstract it out of the world we're in. And
yeah, no, I mean
that never works in my opinion.
Well, it doesn't work, and it shouldn't work. Like what sci-fi should do is talk about themes that exist in the here and now. What fantasy should do is show the ways that character motivations are consistent no matter how many dragons are flying at you and which spell you're using. Because that's all world building stuff. I should know. I've like tried to write a book over and over, and I just can't get out of the world building elements, and I'm like, no, but it needs to be about people, So if you're doing a freaking genre, then that's your excuse for being on stage. That might be overstating it, but it's not the reason anyone's going to care. Sean Hill used to say after like an okay show, he would say, I think the audience liked it. I don't think they'll be thinking about it tomorrow. Everything. That was 20 plus years ago that he said that, and then I think about that to this day.
Wow.
And I've said, my wisdom that I've told students before is like, your goal should not be to get a laugh. Your goal should be to get the audience to go, "Aw." It doesn't even have to be a sappy thing, but that's an indication that they've experienced an emotion that they'll be remembering as they walk out of the theater.
You're making memories with your show.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing Back to the Future does well is really, and that directly relates to improv, is lots and lots and lots of exposition, and not just exposition, but repeated exposition. And I loved that as an improviser. They're sitting at dinner, and the daughter says, "No, we know, Mom, you felt sorry for Dad, so you took him to the fish under the sea dance." No, it was the enchantment under the sea dance. And it just tells the story so explicitly. They get back to the 50s. There's posters all over the place for the enchantment under the sea dance, and and it just like they repeat it so much that you could see Back to the Future once, but you would remember that the name of the dance was the enchantment under the sea dance. And great. We've done the activity where you see how many times you can say a character's name in a scene, and
it's never too many.
Never too many. Like it sounds way less awkward than you think it will sound to just like say it over and over. And there's the TJ and Dave Trust Us, This Is All Made Up. They're at one point in the thing, they're talking about the boss who they're planning to kidnap, and the boss's name is Lon Chambers, and they say it repeatedly like that, just stretched out. Lon Chambers, and I will never for my life forget the name Lon Chambers from this random improv show. Back to the Future does that. He talks about the pine tree. He drives past the Twin Pines Mall. He talks about he had this pine tree notion, and the angry farmer says, "You killed my pine trees," and so that by the time we get the payoff of the Lone Pine Mall at the end of the movie, then it's perfectly set up in your brain, and just
like a couple things I would add to that people can keep in mind for shows is that long exposition at the start of a show can often actually be good in that, like, that's where the audience is like, oh, you're telling me what's a thing that's going on that's true about this world. And there's like this conscious, like, okay, I'm in good hands. There's not a whole action sequence that started up to get interrupted by somebody with a clipboard saying, now this is how time travel works.
Right. Exactly.
And they're great at making a lot of the exposition into real character interactions, like the getting the name wrong for Enchantment Under the Sea. That is a classic, like, yes, the kid is tired of hearing about this. They're whining about it. And then the parent is needlessly correcting them on a detail. Like,
yes.
All of that sits so deeply into character.
Oh God, it's so great. Like, who gives a shit about the name of the dance? Well, the mom does, because it was the last time she was happy.
Oh God.
And like, even if that's not literally true, it's like, obviously it has some resonance for her if 30 years later she's like, nope. So right. And like, it doesn't have to be that tragic, but when something impacts you as a character, then you're going to care about it to that level.
You use the exposition to inform your character, to create conflicts in the moment, you're still doing storytelling as much as you can, even while you're getting all that info out.
And the movie works with repetition as well. Another great, the Lon Chambers thing. It works with repetition with Biff bullying George in 2 different time periods, almost word for word. And good, that's character. That shows that nothing has changed from one thing to the next. And the payoff there is, again, at the end of the movie, when this time it's George who's being the bully, or close enough to it.
Rule of threes.
Yeah, like the big rule of threes stretches across the entire trilogy, which is Marty getting knocked out and having the "mom, is that you" scene with his mother, and just seeing the variation that they come up with across 3 wildly different time periods. And yeah, by the third one, they're not even trying to fake you on it. You're just like feeling the satisfaction of, yes, third in a series. I'm enjoying this.
And that reminds me too of like how much of Chicago style, Harold style, like we're doing this scene and then repeating a variation in the next beat and then repeating a variation in the next beat. Just how much of that you can do in narrative, and it helps tie it together and helps, again, set audience expectations so that they
and tells you what to do as well. There's the Half-Life improv game where do a scene and then do it in half that time and half that time, so you go from 2 minutes to 1 minute to 30 seconds and so forth. And when that game works, it usually works because there's a killer button on it. Even if it's not a super funny button, it's something that the player can say and the audience knows, aha, we have reached the end. And the person in the booth knows, it's time to pull the lights. And it's delightful whenever you can hit that over and over and over. And maybe by the last time you go, it's just the player announcing loudly to the button and then the lights being pulled.
One thing that I noticed too that really struck me was the ability this movie has to sort of weaponize audience discomfort. Like this first hit me with the first time George McFly asks out Lorraine and ends up saying, what was the line? Like, my density has popped me into you.
Yes.
Just like they're setting up a situation. You're like, no, I can't even imagine how bad this is going to be. And they keep making it worse and worse and more doomed. And then when the scene turns into something else, you get this huge relief out of it. And
right.
And
yeah, it's a good moment because despite him radically screwing up, she thinks it's kind of cute, which is a great rom-com trope in and of itself, is you do the thing wrong and a potential romantic partner is charmed anyway, and it makes it more plausible that she's going to fall for him at the end of the movie when he stands up. I did want to say, talk a bit about the famous punch when George McFly finally like wallops him.
Oh yeah.
I've often used that as a perfect example of characters not changing who they are, because George has this moment of rage, goes into a fist and punches out Biff, and great emotional reveal, and then he turns to Lorraine, and his voice and hand shake, and are you okay? And he's still George. He hasn't like hulked out on us, and he just had a moment of bravery, and you believe that the bravery was inside him the whole time. You don't think he just suddenly became someone else, and you certainly wouldn't want him to permanently become someone else. So he's just George, and he's done that. And it's nice whenever Cookie Monster is another example I always give of like a compelling character. We love Cookie Monster because he just has the one thing, and every single thing that you throw at him will be filtered through the fact that he loves cookies. Yeah, so much. So Cookie Monster might do a scenario where he punches somebody out, but he's still going to want a cookie to celebrate that he punched the bully.
Yeah, like sometimes I think of this as like characters don't change who they are, but maybe they change how they deal with who they are or how they work with who they are. Like Cookie Monster of late has decided that cookies are a sometimes food.
Sometimes food, yeah, exactly.
But that doesn't change his fundamental nature. That's just different behavior layered on top of it.
Exactly. And it's like Ron Swanson is another just famously compelling, like compelling characters can be one dimensional, at least on the surface, at least on the how they interact with the world. And Ron Swanson is a certain way, but by the end of the series he's supporting Leslie Knope's campaign, even though she's against everything that he stands for. But they do it in this nice elegant way where you see this fits his moral compass to be supporting his friend in this way. And to see that there's something deeper there beyond the politics of how they're running this small town,
Right. So I'm trying to think if there are improv exercises already based around that. Like you have this character who is very simple and wants this one thing. How do we take that character to all of these different kind of points on the circle? How do we make them? How can we make this person bravely fight a dragon? How can we make this person like completely get frustrated in line at the DMV? Like, how can you take a character to situations that don't seem to have to do with their character or don't seem in line with the Cookie Monster getting cookies, but still they're holding on to that and finding a way to do the thing?
One of Jill Bernard's 6 characteristics of a character, her Vapapo model, like how you make a character. Voice, attitude, posture, animal, prop, obsession. And so obsession would be, the Cookie Monster. Attitude would be the Ron Swanson and so forth. But it can be as simple as just standing a certain way. And that your voice and attitude are going to flow from the fact that you're hunched over and using a cane and something like that. I've done activities like, you're walking around up and down the grocery store. You're just shopping for groceries. Go ahead. As yourself. Don't be funny. Don't amuse me. Go. And then I'll call out, you're still at HEB. You're still looking for the skim milk, but you are a trained assassin and you are ready for ninjas to pop out at any moment.
Yeah.
Now you're a person who's just won the lottery, but knows that you cannot possibly tell anyone. You need to keep this a secret, but you still need that skim milk, And so it's not quite what you're saying. It's almost the opposite. It's like here's an activity, and how are people with different sorts of attitudes?
It's the converse of it, sort of. But yeah, it's like that classic. I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm gonna do the next. Where your character has to do the next thing, and you're just gonna leap into the action and find afterwards how this person justifies it to themselves.
Exactly. It's I remember once. It was a spacework error on my part where I think I've told you it was a Thanksgiving scene. And we had spaceworked a table right down the center of the stage towards the audience. And at one point I was a member of the family. And at one point I crossed across the stage like an idiot and just walked right through the imaginary table that we had really clearly defined. And everyone else in that scene, there were like 5 of us. And so the other 4 all in just perfect unison. We're like, holy, what the why'd you do that? And we're just like lighting up, and I realized what I had done, but it was a beautiful gift from my castmates. Like I turned around, I was like, "That's right, no more Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And then just what I knew of my character thus far, I had to put together a monologue about like why I suddenly hated Thanksgiving, and it had to end.
Excellent. I think this might be a good point to bring in, let's see, Michael Furstenfeld is here on the call. He's been setting up an entire map of the time travel throughout the film series, which I am eager to see.
Just when you think you're the biggest nerd,
there's always
a bigger nerd comes along.
And this is where Michael Furstenfeld comes back in again from the future, October 21st or November 5th of 2022, to remind you that you can get early access to the rest of this conversation, part 2 of Steal Every Media, by becoming a Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, or Twitch subscriber. And you can follow us on Twitch at twitch.tv/makeeverymedia to catch us live and be a part of the conversation. Or email us at makeeverymedia@gmail.com if you need help building your podcast, movie, app, game, virtual conference, broadcast. Check out more of our work or book a discovery meeting at makeeverymedia.com. Or again, linktree.com/makeeverymedia to find quick links to all of our support channels. Today's background music was provided by Scooter Holiday. You can find more of his music at scooterholiday.com. Very special thanks to Peter Rogers for hosting this episode and doing this test run with us. You can find more about him at his website, www.peterrogers.info. And you can hear another podcast that Peter's working on called Tales from the Black Vault at blackvault.net. And also a very special thanks to our guest, Kevin Miller, to Benjamin Blattberg, Julie Moore, Amber Quick, Lindsey McGowen, Paul Normandin, and Stephen Robinson, and Todd Meehan for being there in the chats when we were broadcasting. And finally, thanks to all the improv schools and communities out there, especially in Austin, Texas. I'm talking about Merlin Works, the Hideout Theater, the Fallout, Cold Town Theater, Shannon Stott's Improv on and off the stage. We'll put links to all of those in the episode's show notes. I'm pretty sure they all have free intro classes if you're looking to explore the improvisational arts. But that's enough links and thanks for now. I'll let Kevin and Peter wrap this up with their summaries, a full 40 minutes later in the conversation after Jules and I came in. Anyway, thanks for listening. See you next time. Here's Kevin and Peter.
Yeah, I don't have a big summary statement or anything. It's a movie that knows what it wants to do and just does it, just knocks the balls out of the park as fast as they come. And the iconic characters that, it's an excellent point, Julie, about their cartoonish forms. Like, that's a great way to think about it. Like, you can just picture them. Yeah, I can see what the loopy cartoon version of George McFly would look like, and that's a sign of good characterization as opposed to some, I don't know, Fast and Furious movie maybe, which is good in its own way, but not in the way of, having distinct, interesting characters.
Yeah, and I guess my final thoughts are just in the kind of bigger picture of, if you're an improviser, how you can watch a movie, like how you can look through the things that make a movie great and see that there are some like pure cinema things like action sequences that aren't going to work well on stage, but there are maybe things that you didn't think of at first, like how well an actor is clowning in a role that will translate perfectly to your medium. And I hope we can have more conversations like this of seeing what art has to offer us that we may not have thought of going into it.